Hello, great everybody. Welcome and thanks for joining us today. We're going to start our meeting today, which is going to focus on people and COVID with this short video, which we'd just like you to have a look at. The production credits go to Derek Owen, BJ Golnick, Jeff Daniels, Sophia Nicolini-Schlossa, Artie Jane, and then Sarah Sidaran PA, Undivided Attention, Brothers Golnick Productions, and Twee and everyone else in 4SD. The photos and footage come from UNICEF, Simon Morix, Sabjan, and Oqueda Tamayo Mortera, who's sending in pictures from New Zealand. And I'd just like to see whether or not we can show this. This is a video, as I said, that talks about the role that people play all over the world in getting COVID ready. If we'd like to just, it's a couple of minutes and should not be, I hope, giving us too many troubles on the projection.
और इससे बचने के लिए लॉकडाउन किया गया है ताकि आपको इस बीमारी से बचाया जा सके।
COVID-19 is not suddenly going to go away. And I don't think we're going to have a magic cure. It will be some months, possibly years, before there's a vaccine that has the potential to protect everybody against it. So we've got to learn to live with it. The best way to keep ourselves safe and avoid COVID is to interrupt the transmission as quickly as possible. Hygiene is a key way of getting on top of that. But there are people all over the world, some in very, very challenging settings, who don't have all the resources that are needed to do what I might call the ideal response. In many, many places right now, we have to improvise. I'm hearing of people improvising on hand washing, using no more than 100 milliliters of water for each wash, with a tiny bar of soap, or even just with ash. I'm hearing of people who don't have sanitizers or surface cleaners, so now they're having to try to clean surfaces just with a cloth. And I'm hearing people talk about how they can't get face coverings, even for health workers. They're having to make face protection using patterns that they get from the internet. And I'm saying, yup, please go on. Even if we can't follow all the guidance that's coming from governments and others, we really need to be making the best use that we can out of what we have. Now, more than ever, is a time for sharing experiences, learning from one another, and we learn it as we're going on. It really does require the whole human family working together. Solidarity matters.
Thanks very much indeed to everybody who put that video together. I wanted to share it with you because we are actually launching it today, and the purpose is to really focus on the role that people everywhere play in reducing the risks associated with COVID. Now, I want to go into that in a little bit more detail. I'm going to make 5 points. And the first one relates to making certain that everybody everywhere understands as much as possible about the virus and about the risks that it poses. Unless every single person in the world has as much information as possible about this particular disease, put in the context of other diseases, put in the context of other stresses that they face, it's going to be really difficult for societies to get COVID ready. We've seen this in so many different settings. For example, there is a lot of COVID in slums in India. Unless the people in those slums understand what we know about COVID and what they can do to protect themselves, it's not going to be dislodged from the slums. Ditto, we've got COVID in many different manufacturing settings now, in textile factories, in meat processing factories, in fish processing as well. Again, unless the workers understand the threats that they face, they're not going to be able to work to overcome it. So everybody to know as much as possible about the virus and to be able to work out for themselves, not only what they're going to do to keep themselves healthy, but what they're going to do to keep other people healthy. The second point is I would like to be sure that people are at the center of efforts to contain the spread. You see, if everybody understands that this virus spreads through direct contact and that if you are 2 meters away from somebody, you're very unlikely to get the disease. If you are 1 meter away from somebody, it's more likely. But also remember that it's not just whether you get infected by another person, it's whether you infect them as well. So actually having a clearer understanding of the transmission dynamics and ways to interrupt transmission is absolutely key to getting on top of it. And although many governments are actually trying to adopt rules and to tell people the rules under which they must live, I heard that word this morning in a radio interview I did. I want instead to turn it round and say these are the behaviors and the habits and the ways of relating to each other that we have to adopt. And that will introduce into our relationships an additional level of respect. If you respect somebody, you will maintain a distance from them when you talk to them, unless you're absolutely certain that you are free of infection and they are free of infection. If you are going out and about, you will be respectful of not going up close to people and breathing over them. And if you are really being responsible, you will isolate yourself when you have symptoms of the disease. It's going to be very much to do with what we build into our ways of living, whether or not we are able to keep ourselves free and to enable others to be free. And of course, we have to recognize that for many people who lack power in their work relationships or lack power in their communities, for them actually being able to make these choices and to maintain physical distancing to protect themselves becomes much more difficult. Paradoxically, those who serve us the most are also the most likely to be exposed. So when it comes to interrupting transmission, this will be about ourselves and how we behave, and it will be a great deal about whether we respect other people or not. And we must remember at all times that people who have less control over their working and living conditions are actually at greater threat. And my third point is going in more detail into what I call COVID injustice. I know it's a sort of extreme term, but we talk about climate injustice to describe those people in the world who are exposed to the threats of climate change through no fault of their own and have to deal with the consequences. Well, similarly, there's COVID injustice. There are people who are exposed to the threats by virtue of where they work and where they live, and they have to deal with the consequences. And it's only going to be advocacy on their part that's going to be able to enable them to actually have the wherewithal to change. So we've been listening a lot to the plight of food workers and the fact that many of them are exposed to COVID threats because of the conditions under which they work. And we've been seeing how important it is for worker representatives to advocate for better working conditions to reduce the threat. We've seen the situation in residential care for older people, often looked after by very low paid, mostly women attendants, and how important it is to actually speak out on their behalf so they get a better working conditions. And we're seeing increasingly that people who work in the penal sector, in prisons and the like, are having major problems because a lot of inmates are getting COVID, and also those who work with them are getting COVID. And so it's absolutely essential that there is a movement on behalf of those who are either in prison or who are working with prisoners to make sure that there is care given to the health and well-being of particularly of prisoners. And then as we look at poor countries, we're seeing more and more situations where they do not have the resources to be able to protect their people against the injustices associated with COVID. I think that having reviewed some of the material that's coming through from many different organizations all over the world on issues like equity implications of COVID-19. There's one here that I've just got in my hand from the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People, which focuses on the imperative of civil rights advocacy, monitoring and redress in relation to the COVID-19 injustices. It's just reminding me all the time that this is very much an issue of equity and justice. And all of us who are concerned about reducing the threats posed by COVID are going to have to not be frightened of bringing these issues up. Perhaps the most extreme example is the issue of migrant worker dormitories. All over the world, workers come from poorer countries and stay in very overcrowded dormitories, often with many thousands of people in them, and then they work on construction sites for major infrastructure projects, and there's COVID in many of these migrant worker dormitories, which means that there's something not right about the living conditions, and this will need a lot of effort by those who want not only to reduce the threats of COVID, but also want to make sure that the inequities revealed by COVID are given attention within the context of our work on the Sustainable Development Agenda. Of course, this then brings us to my constant theme of false choices, but I want to look at false choices from the people angle. So I'll start with one. You know, either we look after people's health and we reduce health risks, or we face, or we focus on economy and economic recovery. And somehow it's presented as a balance, as a choice. Here's one choice that I heard the other day. You know, if more attention is paid to the conditions under which workers operate in food processing plants, then the price of food will have to go up because the working conditions will have to be changed, because employers will have to invest in new working conditions. If the price of food then goes up, that will hurt poor people who need cheap food. And that may also mean that there will be more pressure to lay off workers because the companies cannot maintain profitability. So often I hear the issue presented in terms of, for economic reasons, the situation has to stay as it is, and we can't afford to improve the conditions under which workers are asked to work. I mean, I do think that's a false choice. I mean, first of all, I would be keen that there is a debate, a public debate, on whether or not keeping food cheap justifies maintaining conditions for employment in factories that process food that actually lead to the likelihood of people getting COVID and other diseases as well. And because I would like to see these choices and these options made public and shared, I think that, I suppose in my own work, I want to continue to articulate the reality that yes, to create COVID-safe workplaces as part of remedying this COVID injustice that we're seeing, there will have to be changes in the pricing structure of key commodities like food, particularly fresh food. And probably construction will get more expensive if the conditions under which migrant construction workers live are made more decent and are made less prone to COVID infection. Well, I think that debate has to happen. After all, you know, we tend to live with some of the great inequities in our world, and that does have an impact on the cost of basic commodities that many of us buy. But it's right, I think, to be reminded that for us having access to low cost facilities, or having less tax to pay because services are cut back in local authorities, that there is a price to pay for that kind of thing. You know, one of the reasons why COVID is so bad in many countries is because public health services have been cut back over the years. And that's a reasonable thing to point out. Now, one's here talking about the way in which power is used and whether power is used to remedy inequities. And again, it's reasonable to have this in the debate. It's not something wrong to raise it up. So I'm wanting to try to talk about what I see as false choices when policy trade-offs are made, especially now when we can see the actual cost of cutting back on investment in public health, cutting back on investment in pandemic preparedness, and having to cope with enormous, long-standing social and economic costs for the world. So let's keep recognizing that often it's not a case of saying either or, it's saying, yes, we will go for public health and we will go for a just economy as much as possible. And by the way, I keep talking about mirages as well. And I just want to remind you that one of my big mirage areas right now is we'll have a vaccine available for everybody by the end of the year, and it will be safe and effective. I hope we will have a vaccine soon. I think fabulous work is being done to develop a vaccine, but all vaccines must be tested thoroughly for safety and for whether or not they work. And there are really well-established protocols for vaccine testing, and corners should not be cut, because the last thing I want to see or anybody else wants to see is a vaccine with bad side effects. So a mirage, I think, is being given to people when the leaders are saying, we'll have a vaccine available for everybody pretty quickly. I'm saying, let's have a safe and effective vaccine available for everybody at the same time, fairly distributed, and with people given the opportunity to choose whether or not they wish to be vaccinated. This has to be the basic principle. And that's how I believe the world will eventually be fully protected in relation to both this disease and we will need the same approach for other threats. But let's, in the meantime, just not bank too much on quick availability of a vaccine. Let's make sure that basic community level public health services for detecting cases and interrupting transmission are in place as soon as possible. I thought I'd just finish by really focusing on where I think people everywhere are showing how COVID can be addressed and are showing their solidarity in the face of this threat, and they're linking it with the many other threats that they face. And I'm probably repeating myself for some of you, but I'm just really excited to hear, for example, the mayor of Chicago talking about how she anticipates that it will be the poorer people, and particularly the Black people in the city of Chicago, who will show the rest of the city what it takes to be living with COVID as a threat in that city, and what it takes to be responsible in relation to physical distancing, face protection, and hygiene, because it is the Black people in Chicago who have been most affected by COVID. Really impressed listening to the mayor and hearing what she is saying about putting people right at the center of the effort and trying to shift it away from authorities doing the leading to people doing the leading. Talking to my colleague, Sam Bosso, who is the WHO COVID envoy for West Africa, saying to me that in Mali, it is people making choices about how they're going to factor COVID in amongst other threats in their lives, and doing everything they possibly can to support each other in communities with regard to particularly enabling those who can't move around to get the food and other vital requirements they need. And then hearing repeatedly stories of communities in the UK and in France who are organizing themselves to deal with COVID along with other threats through local level solidarity and local level rigor in finding the disease. Hearing about schools in France and in other parts of Europe where the teachers are working with the parents to create the best possible circumstances, and the children are participating actively in establishing means for physical distancing. and doing it in a hugely responsible way, so that actually the children become almost role models for their parents. Hearing more and more stories about how everybody has come to understand that they are less likely to communicate the COVID when they're outside in the open air than they are when they're in enclosed, confined spaces. So trying to move as many activities as possible outdoors, where it's warm enough to do so, so as to minimize spread, and recognizing that and factoring that into their decision making. Now, I appreciate that the good stories don't spread anything like as well as the bad stories. And of course, there are many people who are actually very angry with what they see as inconsistent messages from authorities. But actually, at the heart of all this effort on COVID is the efforts of people. And I believe that more and more governments do see their role as creating the best possible conditions under which people can make the choices they need to do to continue with their lives, whilst at the same time minimize threats to themselves and others. And I suppose that's why I want to do everything I can in my own advocacy to stress that if people are empowered and enabled to act, then they will make choices that make sense to them and also make sense in their communities. They won't necessarily always be hard and fast and rule bound, because as all of us know, when we're deciding what to do in any activity, we are making calculations about risk to ourselves and risk to others. When we're driving, we're always making those sorts of calculations. When we are doing any kind of activity that involves a bit of stress and threat, again, we're making choices about risk. And I believe that living with COVID and having a just life with COVID involves all the time enabling people to be trusted to take risky decisions, but at the same time ensuring that the state, in the form of the local authority or the central authority or the employer or the local organization, be it religious or otherwise, the purpose of these entities is to create the context within which these risk-related decisions can be made with minimum threat to the individual, particularly if something goes wrong. And that's perhaps the two roles of the state. One is to inform people so that they are in a position to make risky decisions and to support them as they do so. And the second is to protect them just in case they've made a decision that hasn't gone well for them and for their family, and then to offer support. I mean, it's always very difficult, the contract between individuals and the state, and there'll always be some sense that if somebody has made perhaps an error of judgment, if that's the right term, and has come out of a situation badly, then they will be blamed for it. We've seen this with many other disease issues. But I'm going to take a really quite permissive view of the role of the state and relationship with the individual, one of supporting, assisting, and guiding, and at the same time, one of protecting and caring. And I think that all this has to be done without any kind of sense of blame. And it is part of the contract between state and people. And it's a contract that I personally believe in. And that brings me towards the end, because what it means is if we accept that people themselves will be doing most of the decision making, and if we accept this role of the state in informing and supporting, whilst at the same time protecting and caring, and if we accept that employers, as well as local organizations, play a key part in making this happen, then I believe that we can get our heads into the position which will then create the right conditions for public health in the face of COVID and other threats. And where in all this do I put public health professionals? Answer, I continue to see us as being very, very important as advocates for every person with regard to their health and well-being. And that doesn't just apply to people who've got qualifications in public health. It applies to everybody who have those values about the reality that all lives are equal and have equal value and deserve equal attention, which I think applies to many more than just people who are working in public health. And it's a core credo for many of us who work in development and must, I believe, also be continued to be articulated in a very positive way. I've been doing it a lot yesterday as in many webinars and thinking I'm proud of articulating about the values of public health and the values of development, because I've taken them for granted for very many years. But just right now, it seems to be able to talk about justice, to be able to talk about equity, and to be able to talk about empowerment and enablement as keys to moving forward, not only through COVID, but through other issues, is the right thing to do. And yes, it's a political statement because it's about power, but it doesn't mean that when I'm saying it, articulating it and expressing it, that I am participating in political activity. And I think I'm going to go on being proud of the fact that I'm making statements that have political content without, again, feeling that that means that I'm somehow being sucked into taking political sides, because I'm not. So back, living with COVID and being COVID ready is all about what people are able to do. For people to be able to do this, we must recognize that there are injustices in relation to COVID, because there are individuals who are more at risk than others. There are individuals who are less easily able to access support than others. And there are quite a lot of false choices in relation to these injustices and inequities. And that I am believing and acting in a way that says, I want to enable everybody to have a chance to participate in the COVID-ready world, the COVID-ready future. Thank you very much for the chance to say these words. I'd just like to greet people who've been on before and others who are on de novo. I'd just particularly like to acknowledge, just looking across my screen, Joseph Batak, Philippines, Mauricio Calderon joining us from Spain, Annie Feltham joining from the UK, Sarah Phillips joining from the UK, Shamim Talukdar joining from Bangladesh. I know all of them. Andre Hoffman, I believe, joining from Switzerland. Lovely to see you. And then Jane Badham joining from South Africa. We've got the Thinking the Unthinkable team on, which is great. And so pleased that you're here with us. Stephanie Okoyo, I hope you're joining happily from Kenya, and that all is well with you. Florence Egal, lovely to see that you're with us again. And Karen Wiedemeyer, lovely. Thank you for coming on. Karen Kaplan, Holly Wheeler, lots of people who we've been working with before on previous briefings, but also some people who are new to us. And just to say that we do these briefings twice a week, and we always try to reflect on some of the different things that are relevant to you. But we have a team doing this work. Sorry, I didn't greet Matthew Moores. Thank you very much indeed. Lovely to see you. So we're a team doing this work who are part of the team in 4SD. We work in 4SD on systems leadership and trying to help everybody to become more effective leaders, not just those who are in senior positions in organizations, but recognizing that every single one of us has leadership potential, value-driven leadership, and leadership for long-term and short-term change. John Atkinson is our Living Systems Leadership Guru. He's just lit up. Twee Nguyen, really want to congratulate you, Twee, for all your work on the videos and other such things and the website. And she is here dealing with all the IT. Catherine Deland, our health person. Joe Colombano, our economics person. Magali Madi, who liaises with NGOs and manages all our schedules. Sabia Mumen, who runs our accounts and comes from Tunisia, Julian Delamontex, who is municipal chief in Flaine near here and deals with our understanding of what's happening both in business and in France, and our most important managing director, Florence Lasbens, who supports all of the work that we're doing. I just want to say that right now we have on the call Okwidea from New Zealand, who shared a very important photo with us for the film that we showed. Okwidea, I'm so glad to see you, and thank you for waving. And just what I read about your work, Okwidea, is that you're at Somerset Care Centre, where families and residents have worked with diversional and recreational therapists to use technology wherever possible to continue to celebrate important days when older people can be kept connected with loved ones. The photo that we selected from you is in the video that we just showed, and it's of 90-year-olds playing bowls indoors while keeping a safe distance in between chairs. Okwidea, I hope I got that correct. The reason why the sound doesn't work on this computer, so I can't sort of listen to you if you actually say it yourself, but I wanted to say it and to thank you very much for what you shared and for joining us from New Zealand and for being able to show us just how in your own setting you've been able to make sense of some of the information we have about risks associated with it. And it gives me a chance to give a real shout out to the people and the local authorities and all the care workers and health workers and the government of New Zealand, who've just done the most extraordinary effort to get on top of the COVID as a country. And I'm sure you'll stay there. And what you're demonstrating to the rest of the world is it can be done. You don't have to be overwhelmed. And so thank you again, Okwidea, and all people of New Zealand. I'd like to now just go to Marianne. There you are. Marianne says, in the debate, how do you bring the needs of women and girls more to the center? And what can be done about access to clean water, which is so necessary for hygiene? I mean, Marianne, I'm going to try to see if I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can, very well, thank you. I mean, I'd love it for you to say so, because for me, when I look at what work you've done, you've been one of the people who's had a huge impact on encouraging us to recognize that experiences of women and girls are just so different from experiences of men that it needs to be called out. But you may want to suggest that there is much more that we can do. So would you like to give us your thoughts for a couple of minutes, Marianne?
Very quickly, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. I think that what we've seen with COVID is that women and girls actually are taking the brunt of the situation, and it's women of all ages. We happen to live longer generally than men, and I can see my friend in New Zealand nodding. But we have older women. They're being isolated. They're not used to being isolated. When you go down the age range, you've got your women who are working on the front line, and as you always say, they're poorly paid. They continue to be poorly paid, whether they're nurses, whether they're just working in care homes. And then you go on, we've got the issues of domestic violence, which women are suffering far more when they've been locked down. And it's then we've got other issues. Are women going to be able to get contraception? Or are we going to have a lot of unwanted pregnancies when they can't get an abortion? Although we do see in some countries that medical abortions are available without having to go to the doctor, which is a major step forward. But the whole thing about this is women bear the brunt. The picture in the very good video that stuck out is the woman who's carrying the water on her head. She's got to get that water so that young people, their children can wash their hands. We're being told to wash our hands. For us, we go and turn the tap on. But for women who've got families in remote areas, and particularly in the slums, again, water is a major problem. And that's why I added that in. You talk a lot, but you haven't talked a lot about water recently. Perhaps next time you could add it in more. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. And I mean, I don't want to say anything more personally, except every time you talk to me, it just really hits home. So track me and make certain that I am making this point every time I have a chance in any kind of interview broadcast. I will try and do so. Thank you, Marianne. I want to Joseph. Joseph, you're in the Philippines. Would you like to come in now and just give us your comment on whether or not priority is going to be given to older adults? Joseph.
Yes, I don't think the priorities will be given, primarily because the issue of economic productivity of older adults. I think that's the main concern right now. From my perspective, I'm not really that optimistic about the whole COVID-19 experience. But I'm trying to do something, as you said, with the local government, but it's very difficult. Primarily, it's the issue of ageism, I think.
So just everybody, Joseph, who's joined us quite a lot of times, he's joined us quite a lot of times on these briefings. Joseph has been really making the point that older people are just being forgotten. They're not seen to have economic value in many government plans. And so his real question is, will there be a priority when the vaccine is available for older adults to have access to it? He's super worried that older people will be somehow not considered a priority for the vaccine. He's saying, if there are vaccine trials, how can I, as an older adult, participate? Thanks for making that point. So just as Marianne made the point that we've got to pay more attention to the injustices faced by women, I think you're stressing, Joseph, that older people are just finding themselves cut out of the discourse. This was a point that Danny Felter made in a previous briefing, and I think it's so, so important. I've got a couple of questions that have come in from related to a webinar yesterday. Let me just tell you what they are. Examples of how to build COVID readiness into our societies. And then what does isolation mean in practice? What are the responsibilities of business owners and government? What do people do in places where isolation is so difficult? And I'm going to just raise that up, and I'd just like to see whether any person who's got their video open wants to comment on the challenge of what to do where isolation is difficult because of overcrowding or because people have very, very small apartments. I know that Shamim Talakdar, when he was talking about Dhaka in Bangladesh, was mentioning the challenges of isolation in his country. Shamim, come in now, and then I might bring Maurizio in as well.
Yep, thank you, David. I think that, it is a big challenge for Bangladesh, making the isolation. It's about like 20% people in our whole country is poor. And you will find that, more people are poor in the urban slums areas. It is about 40% in slums areas, people are poor. And they usually do the work in the garments factories or household level. And they live in a one room, like 5 to 7 people lives in one room. So it's really difficult for them to isolate themselves from the other family member. If they become identified as a COVID patient. So I think that there should, a system need to be developed from the government as well as the, business owners, they can make some sort of tent isolation center nearby the, garments industry areas for them, where they can isolate this type of patient. I think this will help to protect the garments other worker as well as the slums people in that areas. Before I end up this point, I have one question for you regarding the drugs and vaccine. You know that there are lots of drugs come up during this COVID period, and several drugs are introduced in our country, and most of the drugs they did not do any trial without any effectiveness, seeing the effectiveness among our population. They just introduced by the companies to take the drugs, and people started to buy that drugs like hydroxychloroquine. If you go to the market, you will not find any hydroxychloroquine in Bangladesh many market.
Really?
Now, ivermectin, you will not find ivermectin in the market. So what should be the procedure by the government to introduce this type of drugs? Should government, started a trial to give these drugs at the hospital level, or it should come into the market and people should buy their own ways? What is the, your recommendation?
Well, I thank you very much indeed, Shamim. First of all, for stressing that we suggest isolation as a means of interrupting transmission, but in slum communities, it's just so hard. And I don't, for many of these things, I don't have an answer. I just, like you, am struck with how hard it is, but I like your suggestion that isolation centers could be created. And I think that that is the approach that's been adopted in Singapore, but they have to be very welcoming centers and not places where people feel that it's like going into some forced confinement. So thank you for that suggestion. And on this business of inappropriate cures, I think we just have to keep maintaining the position that we all have as public health actors, that we really do want to discourage therapies that have not been shown to be successful. And really, we must point out to people that on balance, it looks as though hydroxychloroquine doesn't actually confer advantages, certainly not in advanced COVID. And we just have to keep saying it. And it's really unfortunate because we are having to deal with other publicity that goes in a different direction. Please join me in constantly providing information that's based on the best science that we can offer. That is the only thing we can do. We must not give up. So, Shamim, that's where I sit on that one. I wanted to ask Maurizio if he could unmute his mic. It's lovely to have you joining us again today, Maurizio. You want to talk about taking sides when speaking to power or with power. And you may yourself, if you've got a second now, to just make your point. It'd be quite nice, because I want to hear your opinion on the question, an issue about speaking to power on issues like this, and whether or not you take sides. And then I'd like you to push me a bit on it. Over to you, Maurizio.
Yes, thank you for that. Good morning to everyone. For those of us that are here in this hemisphere. Yes, in science diplomacy, we by default have to take the side of transparent information, of properly produced information and intelligence, so that decisions can be made for the common good. You were elaborating about how people, when people are enabled, I actually wrote it down. If people are empowered and enabled, they can make decisions that make sense to them, making choices about risk and about their life. Obviously, then what's our role in this context? I guess one of our roles is what you are doing, David, which is try to inform people, give them as much information as possible, proper information. And that connects me to what we were speaking about a moment ago, what to do when close social contact and transmission are inevitable. And I guess we can talk about community-led solutions and practices that are informed by the best intelligence available. And I guess that's what one of the things that we can do in order to support the enablement and empowerment of people in places where it is impossible not to be close to your peers. I think that it is important, at least for me, to take that side, to say, okay, what am I about? I am about informing properly, informing all sides of the power equation, because we have all these black boxes of information and asymmetries of power that perpetuate the injustices that you spoke about. And I guess, what can we do about COVID injustices? One of the things that we can do is precisely work against those asymmetries of information and intelligence, so that everybody has available to them the best evidence available. That's what I really would say about that. Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Maurizio, thank you very much for giving your perspective. And that's mine too. If we know that there are injustices, if we know that these are related to inequity or lack of access or lack of opportunity, we do have to say it. And I think we should say it. And that does not mean that we are taking a position that has any, I think, anything that is anti-development or against the emergence of and encouragement of the economy. We're just simply trying to point out that inside all this, there are individuals and there are communities who, by virtue of their position in power structures, actually lack the capacity to advocate for safer conditions for themselves, whether it's working conditions or living conditions. And then, Maurizio, in your organization, this is something that you've taken on more, particularly in the humanitarian sphere, and that too then becomes something that is your center of being, and it defines who you are. And I think that is part of working not just for public health, but also for development. And so I've got another couple of comments here, which I think are relevant to this discussion. This is from Annie, who has just written saying, can we talk about the social fabric where we all have a role? Annie, I unmute you and just give us a couple of sentences on what your point is, because this is about the enabling part that we were just getting on with Mauricio's remarks.
Yeah, thanks, David, and thanks, everybody. It's this interesting thing when you talk about individuals, and I agree with Joseph. It's very easy then for elderly people of whatever age, and there are an awful lot of us, are just pushed aside. But actually, if we think that we're not there just as economic items, we're there because we exist in our family relationships and we exist within the social fabric. And then if you damage the social fabric, then everybody is hurt. And I think it's when you're talking about solidarity is really important because it absolutely feeds into this social fabric. And it's in that sense that we might all be in it together. It sounds a bit like rose-tinted spectacles, but actually I think listening to your previous sessions where we were talking about solidarity. It is actually incredibly important. And I think where I have more worries is the issue of power that you're talking about. Power isn't like health. If I want more power, you're going to have less of it. And I think that certainly here in the UK, that is quite a challenging thing for people to address. So there's a sort of it's trying to contain all of those things, both on the one hand the social fabric and the scandal of care homes in the UK. That's both terrible and an opportunity, and it is trying to draw us together in a way that I think we probably haven't had an opening before. So I think that's all I'd like to say today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for stressing, from my point of view, this notion of social fabric, which is incredibly textured and important and needs to be talked about. And then secondly, the opportunity that comes through the COVID injustice and what it shows. Brilliant. We hold that. We have to hold many ideas today. We've got quite a lot of them bouncing around between us. Orquidea, are you still there? Your video's gone off. I'm just seeing whether or not you're still connected from New Zealand. There you are. I want to open your mic because when I read about what you've been doing, you've been, as far as I can tell, quite systematically investing in social fabric in the communities you work with in New Zealand. Just give us a couple of minutes, Orquidea. I'm opening your mic. Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so my focus in New Zealand is social engagement, and I have specialized in gerontology, so it's working with older people, seniors. And I suppose when we talk about COVID-19, it has been quite challenging just witnessing what has been happening everywhere. So obviously what we have to put in place in New Zealand was taking action immediately, locking aged care facilities, but at the same time, we're talking that we didn't have the resources to keep people connected without the use of technology. So there was a lot of fundraising, there was a lot of actually solidarity among all the communities, people donating laptops, phones, iPads, school children's writing letters, making cards. So we have a whole lot of campaigns happening within the country. I suppose that we were able to facilitate that because we're only 5 million and social media is quite centralized. So you can talk to anyone at any time and any point. But it was just quite fascinating to have people that were able to take the leadership and to say, okay, maybe not everyone has access to this, but we're gonna be calling across the whole population and say, who would like to contribute? And people just put their hands up and it was just kind of not even having to beg, but people becoming aware that we were all in this together. And we have a lot of people from different nationalities in New Zealand. We have more ethnicities in the country than there are countries in the world. So we are familiar with social isolation. We are familiar with loneliness. We have a high level of suicide in young people. So we were fully aware of those challenges. And that's when we decided to take action. So part of my role in aged care has been connecting communities, regardless of age, regardless of physical and cognitive abilities, regardless of economic status. Yeah, so it's been quite powerful. I think COVID-19 just challenged to get the best out of us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And connecting regardless.
Regardless, yes. It wasn't about who you are. It wasn't about where you come from. It wasn't about how old you are. It was about that we all need to protect each other.
Yeah. I like it. Connecting regardless, connecting without conditions.
Yep.
That's just the only way to in a way, to rebuild or strengthen the social fabric that Annie was talking about.
Yes.
Thank you for
Yes.
that. Just,
Thank you.
I've just seen, it's gorgeous, and I know it's possibly a bit late for you. Thank you for joining. I saw Chris Lara was on. Chris, are you there? Are you at Sanford? Where are you talking from? Oh, I can't, I can see your name is there, but I can't necessarily see you. So thank you very much for being on. Last go at inviting somebody to speak. Stephanie.
Hey, David.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, I'm here.
Oh, Chris, you're there. And Stephanie.
Yes.
How you doing?
I just tried the new Zoom application here, so I was muted, but now I can talk. Thank you so much, David. How are you, everyone? I'm
good.
here in North Carolina, Duke University.
Yeah.
And we are going to have a science diplomacy seminar today with the honor of having you speaking to us and the big community, academic community and research community here in North Carolina, in the research triangle. And I guess Mauricio Calderon is going to join us because he was the speaker last time, because I believe, and we all believe here, that this is a crucial moment for science diplomacy, definitely, but to reinforce the support to multilateralism. And I think the society here, the US American society, has to be more familiar with all the tools and all the developments that we have achieved with the UN, with the multilateral system, but with WHO. And so for us, it's so important to have this voice today and to have you. And it's all, I think I'm going to share on the chat the link so people can join us today. It might be a little bit late for people in this area of the world, but anyway, you are cordially invited. And thank you so much, David, for joining us. We are pleased.
Thank you, Chris. It's good to be connected again.
Thank you.
As I finish today's briefing, we have focused on the role that people everywhere are playing and will play in COVID readiness. But we've recognized that it's not the same for everybody. There are real COVID-related injustices at the moment, and there are people who lack power and lack opportunity, who are being required for various reasons to continue working or continue living in settings which put them at risk, not just of this disease, but of many other diseases. But what's come from our discussion is that for women, there are really much greater burdens to be carried than for men. So perhaps instead of talking about people, I should talk about women and men, just to make the point that there are differences in realities of experience and expectations. Also, we've heard that older people are often discounted, and yet they have a huge amount to offer. We've discussed about how when we're talking about people and solidarity, we have to recognize that social fabric, connections between people are really important, because they create the conditions within which different people in society can be enabling action by others. And we've discussed how strengthening the social fabric requires an unconditional approach to connecting, connecting regardless of who you are and what you've got to offer. So social fabric is inclusive, it embraces, it doesn't exclude, it doesn't in any way demonize. And perhaps trying to make certain that that approach, guided, as you've heard, by science and by information, has to be at the heart of what we do. And that if we can operate in that way, then it is possible to get power moving in ways that promote justice and equity and goodness. After all, it doesn't have to be the other way around. It doesn't have to be that power is always sucking away the autonomy and opportunity from people. Although we sometimes see it like that, actually, the whole way in which humanity has evolved has been to encourage equity and collective strength. As it says in the last words of the little video that I was so proud to show you this morning, the focus is on solidarity. Solidarity matters. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed it. I was delighted we were able to have the conversation. I'm going to log off now, but I wish you all well, and we'll go on doing briefings and also reacting to your comments and reflecting what we pick up during the days. Yes, some of the themes will be the same, but sometimes it'll be a bit different, because that's what we're trying to do, to reflect what we're picking up around the world. Thank you all. Bye-bye.